Welcome back to It's Tech Time. Today we're going to cover the basics of the Cisco CLI. CLI stands for Command Line Interface. The CLI is the interface you'll use when you configure Cisco devices such as a switch or a router. Here is a picture taken from a Cisco CLI on a Cisco router using Cisco's Packet Tracker program. Now the color and the font may be different depending on the command line interface program you're using to connect to the machine. Now there's also something called a GUI, GUI, which stands for Graphical User Interface. This is a photo taken from a Cisco GUI. Now we will not be covering GUIs in this CCNA training course, but it's important for you to know that they're there. The majority of the time as a network administrator, you're going to be using the command line interface as opposed to the GUI. Now you'll connect your computer typically to a Cisco device by using what's called the console port. And it will usually be an RJ45 connection like this, or sometimes you'll see a USB plug, but you will always see it labeled as console. Now you'll need a special type of cable to connect to the console port, and this is the type of cable here. At one end you have an RJ45 connector, and on the other end you have what's called a DB9 serial connector. Now on most newer computers and routers, you're going to need a newer cable or an adapter for the DB9, or typically you'll see a USB connector on them. Now, these cables are called rollover cables. They're similar to a crossover cable, but they're different than a UTP cable. Similar to a UTP cable, you'll have 8 pins on each end that are going to be used, but a rollover cable will connect like this. Pin 1 to pin 8, pin 2 to pin 7, pin 3 to pin 6, pin 4 to pin 5, pin 5 to pin 4, pin 6 to pin 3, pin 7 to pin 2, and pin 8 to pin 1. As you can see from this picture, the pins roll over each other, hence the name rollover cable. Once you get your computer connected to the device with the cable, you'll need what's called a terminal emulator. One of the most popular kinds you'll see around is called PuTTY, and it's a free download from putty.org. You would select serial here, then click open, and you should be able to connect using the CLI. The default settings should be enough. To view and edit your default settings, you would click serial in your category menu to the left, and that will open up your default settings for serial connections where you can edit them if needed. Now these defaults are the settings for most Cisco devices, so you'll probably never need to change them, but it may be useful to have some of them memorized when you come to take the CCNA test. The speed, for example, also known as baud rate, is 9600 by default, and that is 9600 bits per second. There are 8 data bits and 1 stop bit. Now you won't need to know this for the CCNA, but what this means is for each 8 bits of data, 1 stop bit is sent to mark the end of those 8 bits of data that is being transferred. By default, parity is none. Parity is what is used to detect errors. And by default, flow control is set at none. Flow control is what controls the transfer data between the sender and receiver. These details are probably not needed for the CCNA, but it's handy for a network administrator to be aware of where to find them. When you first log into the CLI, you'll by default be in what's called the user exec mode. The user exec mode is demonstrated by the greater than symbol at the end of the device name, in this case router. All devices have a host name, and unless you change it, the default host name will be the device itself, in this case router. User exec mode is very limited in what you can do as far as configuration changes go. In user exec mode, you can't make any changes to the configuration. It's often referred to as just user mode. If you were to enter the enable command while you're in user exec mode, you would then be in what's called the privileged exec mode. In privileged exec mode, you would then have a pound sign or hashtag at the end of the host name, demonstrating that you are in privileged exec mode. In privileged exec mode, you'll be able to access and view the device configuration files, restart the device, and a few other admin commands. But a privileged exec mode still cannot make configuration changes, along with some other commands that you're not able to do. Here's a comparison of the different commands that are available for user exec mode compared to user privilege mode. These screenshots came from Cisco's Packet Tracker program. While this is a free and very useful program to use when studying for the exam, if we were to look at the commands available on a real device, depending on the device, there could be several more commands available to the user in the privileged exec mode. If you notice from the photo, I used a question mark to view what commands were available for me in both user and privileged exec mode. So keep that in mind for the CCNA. If you need to know the commands that are available, use the question mark. A handy feature of Cisco's command line interface is that you can use the tab key to help you complete a command. In the displayed screenshot, you can see where I typed in EN and then hit tab, and it auto-completed enabled to help me go from user exec to privileged exec mode. And depending on the command you're entering, you might not even have to finish the command. In this screenshot, you can see I just typed in EN for enabled and hit enter, and it automatically took me from user to privilege. This will vary depending on the command you're trying to use and how many options are available for the characters you have entered. In this example, all I did was type in E and then hit enter, and it kicked back saying it was an ambiguous command. So there were too many options that begin with just the letter E for it to know what I was trying to say. A way to tell what commands are available is to do the character and then a question mark. So in this screenshot, I did E question mark, and on this particular switch, my options for just the letter E was enabled or exit. I have to give it more characters for the switch to know which command I was meaning. Now, in order to make changes to a switch or a router's config file, you'll need to enter what's called global config mode. And to do that, you go from the user mode by hitting enable. In privilege mode, you use the command configure terminal, and then that moves you into what's called global configuration mode, which is demonstrated by the word config in front of the host name. In this case, config in front of switch. Now, you don't necessarily have to type the whole word. In this example, I did con question mark to see what was available, and I have configure and I have connect. So then I do conf for configure, and I do T and question mark. And the only option for T is terminal. So I can enter in conf T, and it will take me straight into global configuration mode, as you can see displayed by the word config in front of the host name, which in this case is a switch. Now, we can set a password for executive mode while in global configuration mode by using the command enable password. So as you can see here, I did enable password, and I used a question mark with no space between password and question mark. So it shows me all the options available for the word password, which is just password in this example. If you have no space between the question mark and the command, it's going to show you what options are available for that command or for that letter. This time I used password again, but with a space between password and a question mark. And as you can see, the output is different. This time it shows you the options for setting a password with the enable password command. In this example, I used the middle option, line, capital L-I-N-E, which means that I type what I want the password to be after the command enabled password on the same line. In my example, I typed TechTime, T-E-C-H-T-I-M-E. Keep in mind when doing this, the passwords are case sensitive. TechTime in capital letters and TechTime in lowercase letters are two separate passwords. And I used the space and question mark again to see if there was any other options available, and the CR that it returned means that no other options available. And so then I did a full line, enable password TechTime, and then hit enter to set it. So to test out my password, I typed in exit while in global configuration mode, and that took me to privilege mode. And then in privilege mode, I typed exit again, and that took me to user mode. And then in user mode, if I hit the return key again, this will take me to a command line. I will enter enable to move into privilege mode, but this time I'm asked for a password. Note that the password does not display as you type it. But as you can see, I must have got the password correct because I was moved to privileged exec mode. As you can see from this screenshot, I entered the password wrong 3 times, and it gave me this output bad secrets, which is the same as a wrong password message. Now we're going to review real quick what we've covered so far. If you're not familiar with the command line, this can be a very difficult topic for you, but we're going to break it down to make it easy for you. Leave me a comment down below letting me know if this is your first time being on the command line. We used the enable command to enter privileged exec mode. In privileged exec mode, we used configure terminal to enter global configuration mode. In global configuration mode, we used the command enabled password TechTime in order to set a password. Remember that whatever password you enter, it is case sensitive, so there is a difference between capital and lowercase. Then we typed exit to leave global configuration mode, which returned us to privileged exec mode. And then we typed exit again to leave privileged exec mode and to enter user exec mode. In user exec mode, we type enable again to go from user exec mode to privileged exec mode. This time we were asked for a password. Remember that the password is not displayed when you type it. And when you successfully type the password, you are brought back into privileged exec mode. When you're in global configuration mode, you're able to edit the config files on the device. Now there are 2 separate configuration configuration files found on Cisco devices. One is the running config. This is the current active configuration file on the device. As you enter commands in the command line, you edit the active configuration command. The other config is what's called the startup config. This is the configuration file that will be loaded up the next time the device is restarted. In order to view the configuration file, you'll need to be in privileged exec mode. In privileged exec mode, you can use the show running config command. Now by default, there's going to be a lot of information in the config file. To save space and time, I'm just going to show a screenshot from the top of it. You can view the startup config the same way by using the show startup config command. But as you can see from the screenshot, right now we're getting a message saying the startup config is not present. This means that we haven't saved anything that we've been working on yet. So if we were to restart this router right now, the password we just set, it would lose it and it would start back up with all the defaults. There are 3 different commands you can use to save the running configuration file, so that the running configuration file will become the startup configuration file. And you can use all 3 of these commands from privileged exec mode. The first command is the write command. As you can see from the output, it will say it's building the configuration, and then it will say OK when it's done. The second command you can use is the write memory command. It performs the same exact function as you can see from the output, building configuration, and then OK when it's finished. The third command you can use is copy running config, startup config. This tells the router in this case to copy the running config file into the startup config file. As you can see from the output, this says destination file name startup config. So now if we were to use the show startup config command, it will now display the change we made of enabling password. Now right now it's storing the password unencrypted, as you can see from the screenshot, which could be a security risk, but there is a way to encrypt this password. In order to set encryption, you'll need to go from privileged exec mode into global configuration mode. Then in global configuration mode, you can use the command service password encryption. Now if we enter the command show running config, you'll notice that our password has become a jumble of numbers and letters. The password itself hasn't changed, just the way it's being displayed in the configuration file is now encrypted by this jumble of numbers and letters. And the number 7 in between enable password and the jumble of number of letters, which is our password, means that it's using Cisco's proprietary encryption on the password. And while this is better than nothing, there is another level of security that we can make this more secure with. The more secure way is to use what's called enable secret command instead of the enable password command. This time I used Cisco with a capital C. Keep in mind this is still case sensitive. Then I viewed the running configuration file again, except this time I typed do in front of the command so that I could stay in global configuration mode, and I also did the shortcut of just sh run for show running config. The do command is a handy feature of Cisco devices that allow you to run privileged exec mode commands and stay in global configuration mode. And now the running configuration has the enable secret up there, which is still Cisco with a capital C, but now it's an even longer jumble of numbers, letters, and characters this time. And the number 5 before the encrypted password stands for MD5 encryption. Now no password is invincible, but MD5 is a little more secure than Cisco's proprietary. Now notice that the enable password is still there, it's not replaced. You need to keep in mind that as long as enabled secret is there, it will use enable secret instead of enable password. So whenever you come to a password prompt, it will be expecting the enabled secret and not the enabled password. And that's because enabled secret is enabled. And another thing to note is enable secret is always encrypted by default. So that means in most situations, enable secret is a better option to use than enable password. Now, an important thing to remember is that you can cancel or delete commands that you enter, and that is done by simply typing no in front of the command. So in this situation, no service password encryption. So now in this situation, future passwords will no longer be encrypted, but current passwords will stay encrypted. Which you can see here where I did the show running config command, then the enabled password is still encrypted. So remember, at this point doing no service password encryption just means that future passwords are not encrypted. So to summarize the service password encryption command, if you enable service password encryption, current passwords will be encrypted, future passwords will also be encrypted, and the enable secret is encrypted by default, so it's not affected. If, however, you disabled service password encryption, current passwords will remain encrypted, future passwords will not be encrypted, and enable secret is encrypted by default, so again, it will not be affected. So the different modes we've covered is first the user exec mode, as demonstrated by the greater than sign in front of the host name. The next is privilege exec mode, where you now have a pound or hashtag at the end of the host name. Then you have the global configuration mode, where you have the word config in between the host name and the hashtag. Some of the commands we learned today is enable, which is used to enter privilege exec mode from user exec mode, configure terminal command, which is used in privilege exec mode to enter global configuration mode, enabled password command, which sets the password for privilege exec mode. We have the service password encryption command, which encrypts the enabled password and others. We have the enabled secret password command, which enables a more secure enabled password. We have the do command, which allows you to execute privileged exec level commands from the global configuration mode. We have the no command that removes the command. We have the show running config command, which displays the active configuration file. We have the show startup config, which shows the saved configuration file that will run on next restart. We have the write command, which saves the configuration file. We have the write memory command, which also saves the configuration file. And we have the copy running config startup config command, which saves the configuration file. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe down below so you know when future videos come out. There will be a link down below going to my website where you can find these PowerPoint slides for your review and study sessions.